Hi everyone. You can start recording now, Kay, if you'd like, and if you want to give the intro, go for it.
All righty, thanks everybody for joining us today. Just want to give a quick overview of Eastern Sierra Land Trust in case you don't know who we are or what we do. We work through a couple different programs. Primarily, we work with private landowners to protect their land in perpetuity. So it's willing landowners who want to retain ownership of their land, but they basically sell to us at fair market value the development rights. And then we extinguish those rights through a legal process, and it's attached in title in perpetuity on their property. So all that goes to say, we really work to keep subdivision from happening on a lot of these large ranches. And in fact, you may have received, if you're on our mailing list, a postcard. I got mine over the weekend. We just completed a project a couple weeks ago. It's called Ullman Ranch, and it's 1,400 acres up in Huntoon Valley. That's a valley just about 5 miles north of Bridgeport. It's the one where as you're traveling north, there's a barn on one side and a house on the other, and 395 goes right in between the two. And it's historically, there's been a lot of sheep ranching. The new owner who bought it about 5 years ago put it into cattle ranching, but that is now permanently protected, 1,400 acres that will be a working ranch. So that's one of our programs. And obviously in saving the land, we're saving the land for wildlife. They don't know if it's private land or federal land. And so we work, when we protect a ranch, it's also habitat for sage grouse and mountain lion and pronghorn. And another one of our programs is our Community Connections program. And Gabrielle is our AmeriCorps member and education coordinator, and she runs that entire program. Welcome aboard, Gabrielle. Here's a program to run. And pollinator series and certifying pollinator gardens is a part of that program. So I'm going to turn it over to her now. And if you haven't met her yet, this is Gabrielle. And Gabrielle, it's all yours. Thanks for setting this up today for us.
Yeah, thank you, Kay. Yeah, so hi, it's nice to see you. And yeah, like Kay said, my name is Gabrielle, for those of you I haven't met. And I want to thank you all for being here on a Monday at noon with us, and joining Roberta as well. She has a great presentation for us. But yeah, so a little bit about the Pollinator Garden Project for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It is part of the Community Connections program, but also essentially what this Growing Together workshop series is for, in efforts to kind of bring together community and share knowledge of, how to make our gardens better, how to make our gardens better for pollinators, for native species, and nicer spaces for each of us. So I'll just quickly go over the Eastside Pollinator Garden Project. If anyone is interested, you can contact me after this. But essentially, it is 3 garden visits. The first one, I come to your garden space, or we do a FaceTime or Zoom or web thing, and it'll be safely if I go to your site. I check out your space that you want to create into a garden. Pollinator garden. We go over a list of criteria, your visions, any questions you may have, what can fit what criteria you already have. And then a second visit is kind of just a check-in, and I see if you made that criteria and what you are missing, essentially saying, okay, you're good to go, here's a voucher. So once you're good to go, you get the voucher for the California Native Plant Society plant sale, which you can take your voucher to and get plants to put in the ground, which brings me to the third visit, which I'll come to, or we can do a little video FaceTime thing. And I say, good to go, your pollinator's ready to be certified, and I give you an official certification sign. So if you're interested in that, please contact me. It's Gabrielle at ESLT.org, ESLT.org. Anyway, all that being said, we are so appreciative of all of our partners on this project. California Native Plant Society, Inyo and Mono Master Gardeners, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, community members, Metabolic Studios, who funds this project. And we couldn't do it without supporters, presenters like Roberta, and all of you participants. So thank you again. And I want to welcome Roberta. She is a master gardener of Inyo and Mono counties. She's a huge help and a vital partner of the Pollinator Garden Project that I just explained. And she's a good friend of ESLT's. So thank you, Roberta, for being here and sharing your knowledge on drip irrigation. So whenever you're ready, you can share your screen or do your intro or whatever you're.
Okay, thanks for having me and thank you all for coming. I have a PowerPoint presentation I can go through, and I think as we go along, if you have questions, why don't you just ask them? I think we have time and it's a small group, so we could do it that way. And we'll answer them as we go. Does that sound good for everyone? Okay. Share screen, here we go. So let's see, there we go. So my topic is drip irrigation made easy. And as you can see, that's a picture of my toolbox of supplies, very well worn, muddy, little dirt on it. There's several reasons that we encourage people to use drip irrigation. Most importantly, it conserves water. It's easy to add or subtract to your system and make changes along the way. It concentrates water on the plants, which hopefully results in less weeding. You can group plants at different water needs together by giving the more thirsty plants more emitters. As I said, it could be changed. You can add bird or animal watering stations. I've also added a watering station to my compost this last year. You can get water to remote parts of your garden without digging. The supplies are readily available, even in Bishop, and you don't have to do everything at once. It does have some disadvantages. You need to check it probably monthly or so. You need to winterize it, although that's very simple to do. And if you forget, probably nothing horrible is going to happen. The emitters can become clogged or break. Animals or gardeners can ruin the lines by chewing, weed whacking them, cutting them with a shovel, and so forth. But hopefully that doesn't happen too often. And here's my drip board. When we used to do this in person a couple of years ago, I'd have my drip board there. So we'll just work off that since we can't do that today. So things you need to have before you start: scissors or other cutters to cut the tubing, a punch for the mainline tubing, goof plugs, plumber's tape, mainline tubing, spaghetti tubing, emitters, sprayers, and closures. It's nice to have a bucket or a carrier. I use a tackle box, as you could see, gloves, knee pads, water, sunscreen, hat, maybe an assistant. And I like to have a pair of channel lock pliers for things I need to tighten. I'm not as strong as a man, so sometimes I need that extra help. So here's the pliers. These, you can see the pointer, right? These are the punchers. Here's the goof plugs. Here's the plumber's tape. It's nice to have a plan so you know kind of where you want to go. I tend to do things freeform without plans, and sometimes I regret that. But this is a plan for a vegetable garden with the main hose coming and shoots off to the left and right, and then more shoots through the garden beds. If you have an existing watering system, you can definitely convert it over to drip. If you have Rainbird sprinklers, they have screw-on caps to cap those off. Otherwise, if you have pop-ups, you can convert them with a variety of parts. if you have an oscillating rainbird type sprinkler, unfortunately, they do not make a converter. You have to dig up the whole can, which is usually about a foot deep of digging. But this is a cap that goes on the rainbird sprinklers. And here's one. I've had this in place, gosh, since 2005 or 6. I screwed off the sprinkler part and screwed that cap back on. This is a converter to add mainline tubing, and this has PVC glued into it by the factory, and it has the threads in there, and it'll screw right into a riser. And these come in T's and in L's. And here's an L in ground, and here's a T in ground. And so my yard came with a big lawn, and we've been replacing the lawn and putting planting beds in. And so we had a lot of sprinklers and rainbirds and been converting all of those.
I missed the first 10.
Sometimes if you have a sprinkler head that you want to leave in, you still want to run a drip line to something, maybe your watering bowl or special plant or something that's out of reach. You can buy these and then insert a micro tube onto it to your plant. And here's another device, the screw on top of a riser, and this one lets you run 4 of the micro tubings out to different plants. I find though, particularly with the water and chalfont, these get clogged pretty easily, and I don't find them to be a long-lasting solution, but in your yard they may work fine. And then in this corner of the yard, sometimes I keep baby chickens in a cage and sometimes I don't. And normally I have a sprinkler and it wets this whole area. And when I have the baby chickens, I don't want them to get wet. So I screw this off and I screw one of those adapters on and I screw in the mainline tubing. So a drip system can be very flexible depending on your needs. Are there any questions so far? Okay, so starting out, you need to make a connection to your water source. The simplest way is to connect your mainline tubing to a faucet, and they make connectors for that. You can connect it to an automatic sprinkler valve, either right at the valve or further along when you've converted either a rainbird or a pop-up sprinkler. And for a really slow system, you can convert it to a rain barrel. I think that's just a situation where you'd have extra water, not anything that really needs to have regular water on a regular basis. And gosh, I'm not sure anybody's rain barrels filled up this year. So this might work better in a different location, but it is possible. So I'm sorry this picture is sort of poor, but this is again a PVC fitting, and this has the threads in it, and this is glued to the connector for the mainline tubing. You just screw this onto your riser. And as I said, you can get this in a straight one, an L1, or a T. I like to use plumber tapes on those connections. Anytime we're attached to a faucet, a PVC pipe, a riser, anytime a connection is permanent or semi-permanent. And again, partly that's because I tend to either over tighten and break the threads or not tighten enough. So for me, using plumber's tape makes that sweet spot happen. It's nice to have timers on your drip system. This is a system I had connected to a faucet, and it's just a simple egg timer. I turn it on, set the egg timer, and then come back and turn this off. But at least my watering got turned off. And then, as I said, my whole yard came with lawns and things like that. And so we had a whole valve system of 13 valves at our house. So we have a regular timer that has either sprinklers or drip attached to the valves. Okay, so now the nuts and bolts. There are 3 types of tubing. There's mainline tubing, which is approximately a 1/2 inch in diameter. That's what's used to get the bulk of your water to places in your yard. You can also, if you want, run PVC pipe and then use the connectors for the mainline tubing. If you want something more sturdy, or maybe it's in a place where there'd be digging, etc. It's really your choice and how much work you want to do. What you need to know is there's 2 sizes on the homeowner market. So select one size, and that would be by brand, and stick with it, because the sizes are just slightly different. And if you work with 2 sizes, even though there are converters out there, they're hard to find, it'll drive you nuts. So if you buy at Bishop Nursery, always buy that stuff at Bishop Nursery, for example. You can get this tubing with internal emitters. It comes in black, but there are brown, and I've seen like light gray, white. And I think that's for places where people just throw rock on their yard and have a few isolated plants. And there's also tape and other types of mainline tubing. And I'll show you a picture of this in a minute. There's spaghetti tubing, which is 1/4 inch in diameter, and that's what you use to get the water from your mainline tubing to the plants. You can also get spaghetti tubing in a soaker hose style. In the beginning, when I started doing this over 20 years ago, the soaker style wasn't very good in the spaghetti tubing, but it's much better now. And you can use this spaghetti tubing to fill bird baths, dog bowls, chicken water buckets, etc. And then there's micro tubing, which is it's 1/4 inch in diameter. So let me show you what these look like. So this is the big tubing, and this is the 1 inch, and then this is the slightly smaller inch. So this is what I have, and this is what Bishop Nursery sold. Oops, I'm sorry. Okay. And this is what Bishop's Nursery sold when I first moved here, and they were not compatible. And this is a converter, which I don't think they sell this kind anymore, to connect these 2 together. You also need a way to plug up the mainline tubing at the final end, and you can use a figure 8. And the figure 8, you slide it on the tubing, you bend the tubing and slide the other part on. And that's very effective, and it's really easy when you want to drain them in the winter, because you just pull this back down and just open the bend and let it drain. They also make ones that have a screw off, but I always tend to lose the cap on those. And this is an emitter inside a mainline tubing, and these you can get spaced like 2 feet apart, 1.5 feet apart. And I have this in brown at my house, because when I first saw it on the market, that's the only color I could get, but now they make it in black. And these, I've had some of these now for 5 or 6 years, and I would say all of these are still emitting water. They have not clogged up. So I've been pretty happy with these. And then you can punch holes in it and add other emitters if you need it. And this is, they make something called inline emitters that you put your spaghetti tubing and put an inline emitter, more tubing, another inline emitter. Again, in Stockton, these worked really well for me, but here, not so much. They tend to clog up. But again, you know what your water's like, or maybe you have a filter in your water or a conditioner, and it'll be fine. So this is the pre-installed emitters. I've added an additional emitter. So I've been pretty happy with these. Oh, and the other thing is those inline emitter tubings are the large size tubing, the inch. So, and this is spaghetti tubing with the same thing with the inline emitters. So that's handy if you have a plant that needs a lot of extra water. You can attach one of these and wrap it around the base of the plant a couple times, like 2 or 3 inches away from the base of the plant, so you don't rot it out. But these are handy for those water thirsty plants that you have here and there. And because I live in a more wild area with lots of rabbits and squirrels and things like that. I save my old hoses, my messed up mainline tubing or discarded pipe to run my spaghetti tubing ends to protect against animal chewing or my husband weed whacking them. And occasionally I've even put my mainline tubing inside pipe for the same reason. I have I had a colony of ground squirrels that I had buried my mainline tubing to protect it from the sun, and they just chewed it like crazy. And I had like this lake going on underground. So I should have put that in hard pipe. And that, and that's an occasion where you might want to consider running PVC in those areas to prevent against that. I have to say my house came with a windbreak along the property. We have an acre. So there's a windbreak on the back half, and we're still using the same mainline tubing. And we've lived here almost 17 years. And I think the prior homeowner put that in 2 or 3 years before we moved there. So that tubing has been laying out on the ground in the sun for over 20 years, and it's lasted. So here's the examples of how to close off the mainline tubing. This is one that screws in over here, but this is the cap I always lose. You can have a cap there, and here's the figure eights. And again, the figure eights, if you have one for the smaller tubing, it will not work on the larger tubing. Obviously, the larger one works on the smaller one, but that could be frustrating. So you really need to stick with the one size of tubing, or be prepared to have duplicates of everything. I think what I found here is, for the most part, down here in Bishop and Chalfont, if you forget to drain your hoses, it's probably going to be all right freezing wise. Although with the water in the tubing, the animals can sense that, and in a dry winter, they'll start chewing it to get to the water. So just something to keep in mind. But I have many years I've forgotten to drain them, and they've been fine the next year. So here's the figure eight, and I can show you how to do that. Okay, and then fittings. So this first, we're going to talk about fittings for the mainline tubing, and they come in straight, elbow, T's, and X's, depending on your needs. Some of these more elaborate shapes work really well for more formal shaped gardens and vegetable gardens. There's two kinds. There's compression and easy lock. Easy lock fittings are reusable. They seem to tolerate abuse better. They're less likely to break or crack with winter or people stepping on them. They're fairly easy to install once you get the hang of it, and you can get them with an on and off valve. And if you change your system, you can take it out and do something different. Compression fittings, I've been able to remove them occasionally from mainline tubing, but they're not really reusable in an easy sense. I find them more difficult to install, and they just don't seem to tolerate the winter weather here very well. I used them in Stockton and never really had one break or anything, but here they broke almost every winter. So I'll show you the two kinds. So this is an easy lock, and what happens is this big part here screws. You put the tubing over the small part, and then you screw this big part over the tubing, and that's how it's locked into place. And this is a compression fitting, and you just jam the tubing in there and wiggle it around till it goes in about an inch, and then it's pretty much in there forever. And these just seem to break. This is a much softer plastic, and I guess that's the reason why. And you can get these in different configurations. So here's your T, your straight, your elbow. This is one that attaches to a garden hose or faucet. going off in 2 directions, and this is a straight one, same thing. And this is how you put them on. So you take your tubing, put it in, and then twirl that over the top of it. And then if you want to remove it, you twirl it back and you jiggle it a little bit, and eventually it comes out. A hint on all this drip stuff is it's easier to do all of this if the tubing is warm. So if you're doing this in the winter, let the day warm up a little bit. If you're starting fresh, you can soak things in a bucket of hot water if you really need to get it done when it's still cold. But warm makes things work better. So this is with the compression fittings, you can get it on off switch basically. And I like this for my vegetable gardens because I'm not necessarily using all the beds all the time. So if I have a bed I'm not using, I can turn the water off to that bed and not waste the water. And you see, I've made this very elaborate elbow to get over the top of the raised bed. And here's an L going around some pavement. You can certainly curve this stuff too if the turn is not too tight, and avoid doing that as well. It's really up to you and your design aesthetics, how you want to do it. Micro tubing fittings, they too come, I don't have a X here, but they come in straight elbow and T's, and you can use stakes to hold them in place at the base of a plant. I have a lot of plants in chicken wire because of the critters, so I jab the emitter through the chicken wire and that holds it in place. Or you can use a rock or a piece of wood to hold your emitter in place. And after a few days of hot and cold, it will just soften into place and not move. If you have animals or pets that might move them, or children, then you might want to use holders for them. But pretty much I don't use these except for my vegetables. But you can use U-shapes, there's plastic hold downs, and then you can use pipe clamps or these special drip things if you're going up a wall or along a fence, anything like that. You can use if you're doing pots and things on a patio, you could even use the little clamps they use for cable wire, those kind of things. Anything to hold it down would be fine, as long as you don't compress the tubing. And then emitters. There's drippers, emitters on stakes, woodpeckers, which are drippers, shrubblers, which make a round circle of water, bubblers, microjets, pop-up risers, mini jets, downspray sprinklers, misters, all kinds of things. There's probably ones I haven't even thought about. But if you go to the store, you'll just see all these kinds of things. So let me show you what these look like. So these are the drippers. Also, they can be called woodpeckers. The water comes out here. This is where you're attached to the tubing. Green is 2 gallons per hour. Black is 1 gallon per hour. Red is 1/2 gallon per hour. And orange is 5 gallons per hour. I don't think I have an orange one in here. And this is supposed to be standard among all the companies. But sometimes, like I bought this yellow one at a yard sale. I don't know what that is. I suspect it was 1/2 gallon per hour because it didn't work very well. These are bubblers and shrubblers, and they, I'll show you what they do. And here's a mister. Looks kind of like a bubbler, but it makes mist because the hole that the water comes out is really fine. And here's a sprayer, very similar. So this, you can run these along your patio and have misters like you see at the mall. So this is a sprayer. This is an area of lawn that didn't get very wet for my rainbirds. So I ran a drip line and did a little sprayer, and now that area stays nice and green. Here's T connectors on my minis. And here's the misting kit. And they make flat tape for vegetables, which is kind of nice. So this is the flat tape, and it has inline emitters. And I actually found this work really well for a vegetable garden. I liked it a lot. And then, let's see, microtubing. So this is the tubing that is like 1/8 of an inch wide. And this is what they use at commercial nurseries. So Big Trees uses these, Bishop Nursery used these before they closed. And I haven't been back there yet since they've gotten plants, so I'm not sure what they're using now. But this stake attaches to the microtubing at this end or this end. And one end is the open end and one end is the closed end. So this is nice when you have a place where you're not always going to be watering, because I have all these, but I only have one plant here. So all the ones not on plants are closed and the one on the plant is open. So you just switch it around. And what you do is you take the microtubing and you cut it at a slant and you punch a hole in the big tubing and insert the microtubing in where the water is coming this way and the tubing is going this way, and it works really well. So this is my nursery area, which has anywhere from 10 to no plants in it. So this is working good. My neighbor across the street is using these instead of emitters on her trees in her fruit orchard. And it makes a little spray and she's quite happy with it. So it's another alternative. They have these at Chalfont Big Trees. I'm not sure I've seen them anywhere else in town, but this is a nice option if you're changing how many things you need to water in a certain area. And then again, you can use your drip for other things as well. So here's a fountain that I made for birds. Okay, so this is what a bubbler does. A shrubler would not have straight jets of water, it would be more spray-like, but this makes a big circle. And you can actually get these to go almost a foot in diameter for the circle. So I use this in my lettuce garden. These are nice under big trees because it wets a bigger area. And this is a Santa Fe drain where you put a pipe with perforations, and it can be a pipe, it can be a purchased Santa Fe drain system, it can be a cardboard tube, and you plant it with your tree or your shrub. And I like to run the drip tubing like down it. These people are hand watering, but it's the same difference. But I like to have everything automatic. So I run my drip tubing down there. And here's an example. Here's a pre-purchased one, and here's one I made with leftover pipe at my house. Maintenance. So drip has maintenance. So in the late winter, early spring, I run my system during the daylight hours because of the frost potential. And it lets me check on the system, correct any problems, and make any changes. And usually this is a good time to add lines, bury lines in the ground, or maybe encase them in pipe or whatever. And it gets you outside to play in your garden. I usually start watering at 7:30 or 8, and then I step up the time to 5:45. And then in the summer, I'm watering in the middle of the night. But it's amazing how many little problems you find, or you think, oh, this would work better if I changed it. So this is a good time. So we're still running our system right now in the daytime. And the side benefit that I've discovered is the birds really like to play in the water. And so we're getting a lot more bird action in the morning because they're playing in the rainbirds and the sprinklers. We have lizards that know when the drip goes on and they run to their favorite emitter and wait for the water so they can get a drink, which is really quite fun as well. In the summer, I changed my watering, like I said, to 12:15 in the morning. And you really should consider watering at night or early morning because you get more bang for your water buck because it goes further because it's cooler and hopefully it's not windy in the middle of the night. I'm not watering when the neighbors water, which in Stockton was important because we were on one the system. And if my two neighbors across the street were running their yard water, I had no water pressure. So some people in Bishop might have that issue. I don't hear the pump working. And I like to think the animals that would chew my drip lines are all asleep, which is probably not the case, but I like to think that. You do need to do a monthly walkthrough, making sure everything's still working. If you have plants that look like they're dying, check the drip. Some plants might be getting too much water. And when we have those heat waves that the entire state of California has, you probably need to run your system an extra time if you can do it with water restrictions and so forth, because the plants are just going to need a little extra dose of water. The one thing that's important to remind people of is in the summer, you should not be running your drip lines after probably 10:30 or 11 o'clock because the water heats up in those lines and you could burn your plants. The water gets so hot, you wouldn't want to run it on your hands. So something to think about. If you run it later in the evening, early evening, like 6 o'clock, it will cool down enough to be tolerable for your plants, but just something to keep in mind. Someone last year commented they were running their drip on their vegetable garden at like noon and all her tomato plants died. And what she was basically doing was burning them, but she didn't realize that because you don't think about that. So just keep that in mind. Summer problems are weed whacking, in case this in tubing. And then in the fall, just continue with your summer maintenance strategies, change your system as you need to, considering watering in the mornings again as the temperatures start to drop, cut back on your watering. When it's time to stop watering, turn off your system. If you have valves, get them drained. Take in any outdoor timers, open up the ends of the mainline tubing to drain. I like to mentally, or sometimes I write it down, make a list of chores I might want to do with my drip. Like one year we had a nice rainy winter and I buried all my mainline tubing in my front yard because the ground was nice and soft and I was able to do that quite easily. And that's just an aesthetic thing. But you keep in mind projects like that. And then in winter, if we have a winter like we just had, you're going to need to water. I try to water every 3 or 4 weeks, and I prioritize what I'm going to water: big trees, major plants, anything special that I care about and I know maybe needs extra water. If it's been dry and you're due to water, but rain is expected, water anyway, because the ground is so dry, the rain won't soak in very well. And sometimes I hand water, but I've gotten so I just fire up my drip system, turn the water back on, use it, turn it off, drain my emitters. And this is probably why I don't uncap my mainline tubing, because I always forget to cap it if I have to water in the winter. But just something to remember. Hopefully next winter we'll get a nice rainy winter and we won't have to deal with this. Sources: Ace Hardware, Brown's Salvage for pipe, Chalfont Big Trees, True Value, yard sales, big box stores, drip works, and I guess I should add Bishop Nursery because they're back in business, and I forgot to do that this morning, so I apologize. Everybody has a different set of supplies from a different company, or even if it's from the same company, people have different things. Like my friend and I are not happy with the emitters at Ace right now. There used to be great emitters at Home Depot, but they don't sell those anymore. So everything's a little different, and you're probably not going to find everything you need in one place. And that's just the nature of the beast. And that's what makes it fun if you want to customize your system. So try not to stress about that. You'll get 90% of it at one place, but there'll be this one little thing you need and you have to go to a different store. Dripworks, which is a catalog store in Willits, and you can just Google them. They have a great catalog and online resource. And I like to use that to see what all the possibilities are. And then usually I can find the same item or similar item in town and I buy it locally. But when I first got the big tubing with the inline emitters, nobody in town sold them. And then I discovered Big Trees, ordered from them. So I had Big Trees order it. And now people carry this in the store. So, it's, shopping here is kind of an adventure sometimes. So it's fun to go to all the places. And again, I'll have to stick Bishop Nursery in there, and I apologize again. Last year, people asked me about book resources. So, and I didn't have a good answer for that because I think I pretty much know how to do everything. So I don't look at a resource anymore. But if you're starting out, this drip irrigation book on the left-hand side has a lot of good information in it, and including how to do sprinkler valves and all that as well. So I find that to be a pretty good book. And the rainwater harvesting book isn't strictly about drip or rainbirds and such, but it has a lot of interesting information on maybe taking rain from your rain gutters, things like that, how to make swales in your yard. And I think for people in town that have those little drainage creeks growing through their yard and stuff, I think there would be a lot of practical applications here out of that book. And it's just interesting to read. It's interesting to read how in some communities it's illegal to harvest your rooftop water because they want all the water to go into the water table for the community water. In other places, it's exactly the opposite. So it's just I'm kind of a geek about these things, so I find this very fascinating. And he probably has a newer edition out on this. I think I got this at the Mono Lake Committee bookstore many, many years ago, but I think they still have it. And then final thoughts. With decent water pressure, you can usually have 2 or 3 times more mainline tubing and emitters than the manufacturer says. Just make your system out to a certain point, see if it works, and then you can add on and see if it's still working. And I just keep adding on till I don't have any emitters emitting water at the end, and then I dial it back a little bit. At my house, I have sprinklers and drip on the same valve lines because my yard, as I said, came with these systems and I'm sort of stuck with them. It's too hard to redo everything without digging up the entire yard. When you have plants that need less or more water, you can add or remove emitters. Check your system. In the summer, when you need that extra shot of water, I'll run it during the daytime and make sure there's no problems. But if it's really hot, I get to run through the sprinklers and cool off, and that's sort of nice. And the bottom line is to put emitters where you can enjoy your garden. Okay, so that's the PowerPoint. So does anyone have any questions, thoughts, suggestions?
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, or if you want, put in the chat and I can read it out loud.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Roberta, thank you so much. That was very enjoyable.
Oh, well, thank you.
Appreciated it. Could you recommend, I think you, early on in your presentation, you had a list of a couple of tools. To cut the main line, what do you recommend other than just using a knife?
I never use a knife because I cut myself because I'm like clumsy that way. I use a good pair of scissors. I have these IKEA scissors that I just love. I used to use the old metal like Weiss scissors that people use sewing and stuff. Sometimes I'll use garden clippers. It's almost anything will cut the smaller tubing. But sometimes I had a hand injury about 4 years ago, and I couldn't cut the mainline tubing with scissors for about a year, so I had to use garden clippers. But now I can cut them back with scissors again. So I think that was my hand strength. So you just have to experiment, because it doesn't really matter as long as your cut is straight and clean. I guess you can use a knife, but I tend to do bad things when I use a knife.
Okay.
I have a friend who punches the holes in the mainline tubing, not with an official drip puncher. She uses a nail. And I told her, oh, I can't recommend that, but I'm going to share that with you since you want to use a knife. But it's just whatever works. And if the tubing is warm, it cuts easier than when it's cold. And when you're setting up your system, your tubing, the big and the little is going to come rolled up. What you need to do is about a half hour or an hour, if it's dead of winter, before you start, is you unroll it and unroll it out straight and let it warm up, and it will lose a lot of that curl and kink. Your life will be much happier. And you just hook it around a tree and run it, even if it's 50 feet, you just run it across your yard, hook it around something else, and it'll make all the difference in the world. So, yeah. Anyone else? Yes, Jenny.
Sorry, I had to unmute. It's thank you, Roberta, again, for your talk. It's a very nice resource. Appreciate it. Kind of in line of the tube, cutting the tube with the scissors, like you say. Now, what I have is something a little different. This is the way my landscaper installed it, is with the these manifold things.
Oh, right.
Okay, so it's really hard to attach the tubing onto there. Any tips besides, I think I'll try really warm water. Maybe that might be a little more helpful, but any other tips?
You don't want to use grease or anything because it could easily slip off, and it's probably not good to have it in your water. I think if you lay the spaghetti tubing like on your driveway and let it warm up. And I notice for me, I'm right-handed, but I do a lot of things left-handed. And some days pushing with my right hand works better, and other days the left hand way works better. So you may have more hand strength in one hand than the other. And if you figure that out too, that makes a difference. I mean, it's silly, but
yeah.
But I've had some when I've used those, I can do the two, and then I have to like get on the other side of the manifold, and so I'm still using my right hand to push it in on the opposite side.
Yeah, so it's just
sometimes you can unscrew those if you're your spaghetti tubing isn't very long, you can unscrew them, put the tubing on there, and then screw it back on.
Oh,
Feeling in the ground, on the dirt,
right.
awkward position.
Yeah, that would probably be helpful.
Yeah,
that.
so that might help too. Sometimes it's just,
Mhm.
I mean, I've had things where I've punched holes in mainline tubing and I'm just trying to put an emitter in it, and I have to like practically turn upside down to get it in, because that day things just aren't working right with my hands. Or asking someone with stronger hands to do it for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah, there's no
kind of a
trick.
hard
They
thing.
make it hard to go on so it doesn't come off with the water pressure. And some days it's just like, oh, I can't get this on. And you go back the next day. But yeah, try to warm the tubing up. And
Yeah, I think
sometimes
I'm gonna try that.
I'll recut the cut.
Okay.
Sometimes when you cut it, you smush it or something.
Mhm.
It's all variable, but yeah, you just keep trying. But sometimes just the body position you're in makes all the difference.
Great. Thank you.
I have a comment
Okay.
about that, Jenny. I had the same problem, and I took a golf tee, wooden golf tee,
Yeah.
and put it in the end of the tubing, and just widened it just ever so slightly so
That's
I
a
could get it
great
started.
idea. I'm not a
Yeah.
golfer, so I don't have those, but that's a great idea.
I like that.
I guess a pencil would work too,
Yeah. Yeah. You just felt like you needed to put something in there to stretch it out. So
just stretch it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can always cut it if it's too loose. You just, start fresh again.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, you could try to use a pair of pliers, I suppose, to get it on.
yeah. So I just didn't know if there was some connector I didn't know about. Like
No, you just
maybe
connect it
there's just
directly onto
something I'm
that.
doing
No.
wrong. It's
No.
just do it and figure it out.
I mean, what you could do is unscrew it, cut like 2 inches of spaghetti tubing for each one, put a straight connector on an end, put the little short guys on, and then you could do your long ones after that. I mean, you could do
that might
too.
be easier. Yeah.
I mean,
And then you don't have to, yeah.
Whatever works.
Thanks.
But I like the golf tee.
Yeah.
I have to put one of those in my box.
I'm wondering, I have a section of, it's a traffic strip and the corners aren't getting hit by the sprinklers. Can I attach to the sprinkler some kind of drip line and have the sprinkler still work? And then also have a drip going to the very corners? Is that possible?
Do you remember, let's see, how do I do this? There was, okay, so I'm going to go back in my PowerPoint and look for what I want to show you. And then I'll share my screen. And this may be something you have to get from the catalog. Okay, I found it. Where's my share screen thing?
So bottom bar, it's the green upward arrow. It says share screen. You see that?
No, we're doing something.
Hmm.
Okay, here we go. Let me get back into our regular Zoom. Share screen. Okay. Okay.
There you go.
That didn't work as swiftly as I wanted it to, but okay. So this is the device I was telling you about, and it screws on between your riser and your sprinkler head, and it has one of these connectors to put your microtubing on, sort of like what Jenny was showing us. So that might be an option.
And then I can put the sprinkler head back on?
Yes.
Okay, so as long as there's enough water pressure,
Yes.
it'll go, okay.
Yes. You may have to mail order this. I think I ordered this from Dripworks because it's sort of a weird, unusual thing.
Yeah, what do you think it's called?
I don't know, but if you call or email Dripworks and tell them what you want, if they sell it, they'll tell you that they have it. They are very with it on all this.
Okay,
But I don't think I've ever seen that in town. The other thing you can also do is you dig down to your sprinkler and you cut it and you add, more tubing and blah, blah, blah. You can do all that. But if you have the right kind of sprinkler system and you can find one of those, that's the easiest way to do it.
all right, thank you. That's good.
Or you could put rocks in the corners.
I wanted some poppies. Thank you.
Yeah, but something like that should work. I bought that a long, long time ago, actually. I bought it to run water to my compost off the sprinklers.
Cool,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, I just want to be mindful of folks' time because this does end at 1. But if anyone else has any questions, maybe we can give them your email, Roberta, or you can ask me and I can send to Roberta. However,
the second way, that'll be
okay, yeah. Since my email is already in the chat, so if anyone has any questions, you can just send it on over to that email. And yeah, and then
and I am a master gardener and I'm supposed to do community service, so you can hit me that way too, and I could come to your house and look at stuff, which I do like to do. That's kind of fun to see people's yards and what they've done.
Yeah. Well, thank you all again for joining. And also there's going to be more. I'm running out of time, so I won't be able to share my screen, but on our events page on ESLT, we have more workshops coming up. And also Roberta's doing another one on the 14th, I believe. Is that correct, Roberta?
I think so.
Yeah, on garden design. So yeah, check out the events website. And yes, confirmed it's the 14th. So thank you all again and hope to see you again.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.